Welcome to Keen on Retirement, a show dedicated to helping you thrive before and during your retirement years. If you are looking to grow and protect your wealth and want to make the second half of your life the best half, then listen in as Wealth Advisor Bill Keen sorts through the key issues that you need to know in a lively and candid way.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Keen on Retirement. I'm your co-host, Steve, and I've got Bill and Matt with me. Gentlemen, how are you doing today?
Well, we're doing pretty good. Sun's shining here in our neck of the woods, so that's always a good thing.
It is. It certainly is. Certainly is. So, Matt, I understand you and I were chatting here before we went live, and as regular listeners know, you are a race car driver in your spare time, and you were mentioning that now you're working on being a race director. So tell me a little bit more about that.
So the organization that I race with locally, it's largely volunteer based, and so I volunteered to kind of learn that aspect of what's needed to run a race for all the participants. And I've been going through that process, shadowing our current race director and other race directors. And it's been great. I mean, you learn so much more behind the scenes about how all this stuff works and why things are in place than you do, just by driving. You only experience what you experience when you drive. When you're a director, you experience everything that happens on the track. So now you get a whole different view of everything, which I think makes me a better race car driver, at least more aware of what's going on the track when I am racing.
And Matt, I think you also told me that you're a training driver as well, right? Didn't you do some training?
Instructing, yep.
Instructing,
I've done some instructing, yeah.
How's that when you get out there and you get in the right
it's nothing
seat?
complex. It's just new to the track drivers. So they've got a great program. I just help keep them, pointed in the right direction, I guess, we'll put it that way.
Well, with all that knowledge about the race director and how things work, you don't have any excuses for violating the various rules and regulations while you're out of the course now,
Yeah, well, sometimes if I'm racing with another organization, I can be more of a pain because I can ask them a bunch of questions about,
sure.
Hey, what are your processes for this or for that or whatever? Anyway.
Well, speaking of violating race rules, I don't know if I've asked you guys this question before, but I was listening to a podcast one time and it was about sailing, and the gentleman was talking about some racing that he was doing. And this was a story that had gone back a number of years ago. And he said there was another sailor that he was competing against in a race. The other sailor ended up breaking a particular race rule. And as a result of breaking that race rule, he gained a significant competitive advantage in the race. Well, then after the race was over, of course, there's the complaint that the guy broke the rule, and everyone agreed, yes, that person broke the rule. And the person was assessed a time penalty for breaking the rule. Well, then after all of this happened, it turns out that the racer who broke the rule purposely broke the rule because he thought that the competitive advantage that he would get by breaking the rule would more than offset the time penalty that he got for breaking the rule.
Sure.
So then it becomes an ethical question, right?
Right.
You know what the rule is. You know that if you break the rule, the penalty that you pay is going to be less than the advantage that you get. Now, the person who was on the podcast was saying, personally, I would have never done that. And I think it was unethical for that person to do it as well, But
Sure.
Anyway, so anyway, it's kind of interesting to think about how different people process something like that. Like some people are like, win at all costs. Hey, I broke the rule. I paid the penalty. I still won.
Yeah.
And others would say, I'm going to live by the spirit of the rule as opposed to, that sort of thing. So anyway, kind of interesting.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I mean, to account for probably those types of situations, what a lot of organizations, and this is probably just across the board, not just with auto racing or sailing, they of course allow people to have discretion, and two, don't necessarily publish what all the penalties are, because now you can't game the system because you don't know what the penalty is. It's just, you'll be penalized. What does that mean? Well, you'll find out based on what you did. It's just, it's up to, not everyone likes that, but it's because of that, because you don't want people just taking advantage.
Right.
Hey, it's like dealing with the IRS. There's penalties. We know some of them. Other times we don't, because it's a gray area, and they got to tell us what their interpretation is if they're, dealing with an audit or something. So
that's right.
Yeah.
And it also speaks to our topic today, in some way, when we talk about how everyone has their own journey and how they think about things and how they react and respond to various events that happen in their lives, up to and including receiving an inheritance, right? Which is our topic today.
That's our right. So I'm curious, I have not received an inheritance. I'm curious if either of you two have received an inheritance.
I have not. No,
I surely haven't. I've shared for many years, in the book, Keen on Retirement. Here we did a whole episode on my great aunt Nina. Remember, she was born in 1901 and passed away in 2001. And she had done a phenomenal job with her finances. Of course, back in her day, imagine, living through the Great Depression as a 30-year-old woman and beyond, and then seeing all the things that had happened since. But she had a portfolio of investments that she had done well with. And she had a pension. She retired in 1968, by the way, from a company in Kansas City called Emery Bird Thayer, an iconic department store that closed in 1968, the year I was born. But anyone who's from Kansas City would remember that department store that's of the age to remember it. But her pension check was $68.02 a month. I remember because I helped her with her finances, of course, especially up in her older ages there. And I remember seeing that pension check. It came in all the way.
$68.02.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. And it didn't have an inflation kicker on it. So it just remained $68.02. But, I was her only beneficiary. My father was an only child. I was an only child. My father predeceased my aunt even. But the way that worked out, Steve, was she was self-sufficient her entire life. I ensured that she was in the appropriate and most dignified retirement communities as she progressed through kind of a failing health thing toward the end. And she finally spent her last bit of investment proceeds about 2 months before she passed. And you know what? That was fine. That was exactly how it was supposed to be. So,
yeah.
Well,
I know you two, the three of us have not received inheritances, but I know you guys have certainly worked with many, many people who have. And if anyone listening has received an inheritance, you may experience some of the things that we're going to be talking about here today, which is what are some of the psychological feelings and ramifications of inheriting money. And this has really been prompted, the conversation today has sort of been prompted by a recent research report that came out that indicated, based on their survey and their research, that 42% of people who had received an inheritance, their net worth within 12 months was right back to where it was before they received the inheritance. So the implication there is that 42% of the people received an inheritance and they spent all of it within 12 months and really didn't have maybe necessarily a whole lot to show for it. So we want to talk about that here today. And how should we think about an inheritance, and what role does a financial advisor play in helping people think about the inheritance, how to structure the inheritance? And if you know that you're going to have extra money that you want to leave to your heirs, this is also for you as well, because we're going to be talking about what are ways that you should think about how to give that inheritance. Things like, should it be all in a lump sum? Should it be sort of phased out, doled out over a period of time? Are there certain parameters that have to be met? So lots of different options there. And Matt, I think you're gonna lead us through some of the thoughts here.
Yeah. And I want to touch on that survey a little bit, because, sometimes you hear that, okay, 42% of the people spend all the money. You might think, well, maybe they were younger. Like, what what were the situations, how much money was it? So, I think this was interesting because it looked at ages 50 and over. So it's not because they were young. Like that wasn't, it's common for people to think, well, someone that's 18 is going to do something way different than someone who's 50.
It probably would. I mean, that's reasonable.
Well, they would spend it on other different things. We'll put it that way.
Okay.
They both spent it, essentially. It's just what they spend it on.
Mm-hmm.
And two, the average inheritance in this report was $133,000. So it wasn't,
Millions.
It wasn't, but it also wasn't less than like $10,000 either, where someone just, okay, it whatever. So it's enough to, I think, get everyone's attention around how do we set people up for success? Because essentially it's like, well, if they're going to spend it all in 1 year, why even leave it to them? Because that's maybe not the objective. Or two, you didn't get to see them enjoy any of it. Or if you were to gift them while you're alive, which is an option, would they have done something different? Could you have taught them about the money and how to handle it and what to do with it? I mean, there's a lot of different options there that you have. So I think it'll be good. Yeah, we can talk through like, well, one, how can you structure if you are worried, because there is a state tax way or state planning ways to structure how you leave money to the next generation. But then there's also just the concept of, well, let's teach the beneficiaries about the money, maybe not share the balances, but how do we teach them how to handle the money if they're not ready for it, or if you're not sure, how do we prepare for that?
I think that it's good to further frame, and you mentioned it, Steve, and Matt, you too, but to further frame who this may be affected by. You may recall, gosh, I lose track after all these years of doing our episodes, but we did do an episode maybe 9 months ago or so on lottery winners.
Yes.
We had some really interesting data on lottery winners, and very similar to this, where a good portion of them lost all the money and then and went backwards too. And remember, it either ended up with legal issues, drug issues, or even suicide in some cases. What we discerned from that was that it wasn't everyone, just like this study says 42%. Yeah. Some people actually did thrive with, not everyone that won the lottery, spiraled out of control like that. But the other one that I think is important is folks that are receiving their lump sums distributions at retirement, which is what our whole business has been focused around, helping people navigate up to and then make that transition into retirement, where in some cases, folks have had control over assets, maybe 401k assets. They've saved some money outside of their retirement plans. In other cases, whether it's like one of these ESOPs where they don't really have a whole lot of control of their assets inside that ESOP, so they're not making decisions on how it's being managed. Or there may be a profit sharing plan where someone that wasn't sophisticated or didn't have any really experience investing money retires, and this lump sum of capital gets dropped in their lap. So whether it was a lottery winning, which is kind of hard to see that coming and plan for it, but a retirement journey is something we can plan for, educate for, which is, again, what we've created our whole firm around, is that education and financial wellness aspect, being prepared to receive the money. If you're not prepared to receive the money, it will take wings and fly away in whatever form it lands in your lap. And so I think all of this applies, and it applies broadly to, you said earlier, have you received an inheritance? Well, some have, some haven't. None of us have. But probably most of our listeners will be leaving an inheritance. So it's amazingly relevant for the topic of conversation today. It really is.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I want to share some other research here that I'm going to connect to this idea of inheritance. And this was I had a podcast conversation recently, and this led to doing some further research on a professor from Harvard. He's an emeritus professor now, named Robert Keegan, and he did a lot of work on adult development theory. And his research suggested that there are perhaps 5 stages of adult development. And I think stages 3 and 4 here might suggest a path in terms of why people are reacting the way they do when it comes to an inheritance here. And Keegan's basic idea was this idea of subject to or object. And the point simply being that as this relates to an inheritance, meaning, are you subject to the inheritance, or can you view the inheritance objectively as it's this thing over here that I can detach myself from, and I can look at it objectively and I can make some more rational decisions? Compare that to being subject to the inheritance. Well, in that case, you're more controlled by it. You can't really see it clearly. You start asking yourself, okay, well, what would mom or what would dad want me to do with this? Or would my siblings think that I was being selfish if I, went and spent it all on myself? So you have all these other pieces that are attached to it, and you can't really look at it objectively. And according to Keegan's research, the majority of our population is actually at that subject to level of development, meaning that they're sort of embedded in it. It is part of their identity. And again, in this case, we're talking about an inheritance, and I'm sort of making the connection. I'm not suggesting there's any research out there that has actually made that connection between an inheritance and Keegan's research, but it seems like there's a nice fit in there.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, so I think it's another interesting way to think about it. And so if you're someone who's receiving an inheritance, or a financial advisor in this case that may be advising someone who will be leaving an inheritance, then maybe one way to think about it is this is not just a transfer of assets, but we have to think about how can we support the heirs' ability to be the kind of person who can receive this inheritance well. So there's a lot of, I think, some development work that might have to take place here on the receiver's end, just like with the person who won the lottery that you were mentioning here a moment ago, Bill. There's so much tied up with money. And this is just another great example of all the emotional and psychological things that can be attached to money, particularly when we're talking about a substantial sum of money. In this case, I mean, the average here, I think in the study was 100 and some thousand, as you mentioned. So yeah, there's a lot to unpack there for sure.
Love it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you think about, okay, well, how can you help that next generation? Well, I mean, one of the most common ways, and I think one of the ways that works the best that we've seen among our clients, is gifting while you're still living. So let's not just wait till, well, whatever's left at the end and I pass away and it just gets transferred to someone. And sure, maybe you've talked about the concepts and introduced them to, if you have advisors like us, introduced us, but maybe there wasn't any formal relationship or anything. And it just, okay, they got dumped this bunch of money. What do they do? Where when people give while they're still living, and this doesn't have to be significant amounts of money. I mean, there's annual gift exclusions or exemptions every year, which is it $19,000? The number, it just every couple of years, but you can gift that without having to notify the IRS. It's not taxable. You can basically gift up to $15 million and none of it's taxable. It's just the IRS wants to know about it if you're giving over $19,000. It doesn't change anything, but anyway, so you can do that and not have to worry, about notifying anyone. And it could be less, of course. And you can help, whether it's fund a purchase or just even fund an account. We have clients that do that. They kind of transfer money into an account that is owned by their adult child that they're trying to help educate on how to invest and watch it save and compound and things like that. And I think that's been a great tool that people have used. And two, maybe if you're watching them use it and enjoy it, you're enjoying it with them, which is the other aspect.
Matt, I was in a meeting yesterday, had the privilege of sitting in and observing and participating, but really letting our advisors, which are just amazing credentialed professionals. It was Josh Hill and Ryan Core yesterday, which was, just an amazing couple gentlemen. And we were walking through the plan, and this particular client was able to see they were in their mid-50s, early 50s, planning on working out till 65. They were on a great path. The gentleman had a pension from prior military service that he had done, and had a very productive job now as well. And we were looking at the numbers, and we run numbers relatively conservatively. We use inflation numbers and return numbers. Of course, we update these regularly every 6 months to a year. As things have to do better than our predictions, then we update things and pick it up. But even with some conservative projections and looking at travel budgets out into retirement, a new home that was being built, which was phenomenal, a beautiful place. Other needs, cars budgeted in every 6 years. The whole gamut, all healthcare, these things. The plan was like high 90s, right? The plan was high 90s. And when I speak of that, we probably should do an episode again on what is a financial plan. That's the first episode I think we did, Steve, was maybe second. What is a financial plan? Yeah. Right? Because we talk a lot about it, but maybe that's a great example of what we should do next episode to revisit that. But when we look at those things and look at the outcomes and the probability of success based on our statistical modeling, good, bad, and horrible markets and all those kind of things, it was way beyond where it needed to be. And it triggered them to say, wait a second, our kids are in their mid-20s, they're married, they're productive, they have work, they're self-sufficient, but they're trying to get into a home. And we all know buying homes right now is not the easiest for young people with where prices are, and interest rates again have come back up. And they said, so do you mean to tell us that we've been out looking at houses, and some of the places they're looking at, they're just not going to do, it's just, they're going to, in foundation problems, there's the neighbor. And if we help them, even with maybe 50,000, like, we don't want to give them too much. We want them to have most of the skin in the game. But if we helped them now with a down payment on something where they could up their purchase price by even 50,000, like, we're not saying hundreds of thousands, but if we were to do that, it would meaningfully change what they'd be able to afford. And they didn't want to commit to like helping them pay a payment for 30 years. They wanted to do something up front that was like one and done, and not be on the hook for like an annuity or something, long term. But running through that planning process and helping those folks look at that, they could do that today. They could see the kids probably will never need help more, kind of like I've talked about mine, than now. And they saw in their plan, they had the resources to do that and not compromise themselves. That is the power of a holistic financial planning in this exact context. And so within that amount, each spouse can give $19,000 to each of their. So if your kids are married, you can each give 19 twice, basically.
Yeah,
and
you can give 19,000 to anyone.
Actually, anyone you want. In the world. But so a great example, a practical example of something I just got to observe just yesterday.
Yeah. There's lots of different ways that we see this kind of come to fruition. Again, and it's like either to help benefit them in a way that's positive, and again, you're helping them, you see them enjoy it, and then too on the education side too, on how does all this work and everything else. Now we do run into situations too where clients are explaining to us, okay, we have maybe some, I want to say trust issues with the person, whether it's a child inheriting the money and just not sure if they're going to handle it correctly. There's just uncertainty there, or worried about a marriage. So their child's married, and maybe they're afraid that it may not be a long-term marriage, and want to make sure that the funds are protected from a future divorce. So kind of different variations of that. And so when we think about that, one, you have to go through the estate planning process.
You do.
No matter what. Generally, everyone should. But if you're concerned about how someone's receiving the assets and you want to have a little bit of control, you have to go through that process. And typically ends up where it's like you're going to set up a trust account.
Yeah.
And you can set up a lot of different levers within that trust account. Some people can maybe make it overly complex, but the good thing is it's all changeable.
Yeah, revocable, right? You're talking about a revocable living trust. Yes.
You can revoke it, change it. Exactly. It's your trust, it's your money. It doesn't necessarily even complicate your taxes more than what they currently are. It's not necessarily as big of a to-do as sometimes it seems, but you can stagger when money comes out. So, some of that's just saying, okay, I don't want everyone to get the money right. Maybe they're 18 or they're 25 or whatever age. I want it in increments. You can limit what the money can be spent on. So there's a common, phrase or was it acronym? HEMS, HEMS, health,
Right.
education, maintenance, and support.
Uh-huh.
Those are very common limiting, categories where you could say, okay, you can spend it on those things, and you can define kind of what fits in those. That's very common and very, very defensible too. If a client or a client's beneficiary was to get divorced, that it can have protection from divorce in those situations, protection from creditors, because the money is not necessarily accessible. So it's like that money's not, essentially mine. I'm just getting components of the income. And so that's, I think that's important to a lot of people too, when they think about that, because they don't know what the future is going to hold for their kids or grandkids and everything else.
I think it's important too to talk about if you have multiple children.
Yeah.
It's we always say let's see, how do we say it? Somebody asked the other day. I think it was some sort of a personality speech I was listening to, Matt, down in Austin. Maybe we were there, and he said something like, how many of you are only children? And a couple people raised their hand, including me, and then the rest had multiple brothers and sisters. And he said, how many different personalities exist in your family? Well, as many as there are people. Everybody's different, very different. And if you think about your kids, you had 3 kids, 4, whatever the number is, how different are they? Are they all the same? They're all different. They share hopefully some common values. But so with that in mind, I think it's important to say you don't have to treat each child the same.
Yeah.
One might be perfectly fine to receive more of a lump sum, while another you want to have a little different plan for, and that's completely fine. See it all the time, in fact.
Yeah.
And then again, you change. Remember, we always talk about run your estate plan. I heard you say it just recently to someone, Matt.
Yeah.
Solve for the next 3 to 5 years. Don't try to overwhelm yourself, get paralyzed thinking about what might happen 30 years out, because no one knows how many grandkids, how many spouses, how many, just solve for the next 3 to 5 years on this. And because it's revocable and changeable, you just go in and update it as life happens. That's a really important thought.
Yeah. And rules change. So occasionally you got to make updates based on that. No, but that's a good point you bring up, because you can have provisions in there for one child and not for the other. And here's another key aspect of it. There's an executor of the estate that you get to pick.
Yes.
And it's very common for people to pick a family member, a child, to do that. Now, if you do have these situations where there are restrictions, essentially the money isn't all just distributed, once the estate's finalized, then it's very common and often we recommend you get what's called a corporate trustee. So they're the person that's reading the trust, taking the fiduciary obligation to do what's in the best interest of the beneficiaries and follow what the rules and restrictions are of the trust. So then you're not putting in, and the reason we recommend that is because you don't necessarily want to put another child as, hey, you're really good with money. Our other child, your brother or sister's not. So you're going to have to tell them no when they ask you for money. And they're like, well, no one wants that.
Right. And we see people do that, don't we, Matt? I mean, we've seen some be successful at it, where the kids have healthy relationships and all that. And so we've seen it successful, but goodness, at a minimum, having a successor trustee as the institution.
Yes.
So that child that was left as the trustee, if they so choose, they can step aside and it defaults to the successor. I think that's without question should be in place.
Yeah. And you don't pay anything until that trustee, that corporate trustee, actually gets involved. Like, just listing them doesn't cost you anything. So it's good to have it as a backstop, because you never know what's going on in people's lives at the time when this all happens. And hey, they may not be at a spot where they can handle it, or maybe there's a health situation, and so they just defer to the next person in line. And if it's a corporate trustee, it's a corporate trustee, and it is what it is. And Matt, that's important. Yeah,
Matt, think about how many times have we heard folks come in and ask us, hey, I have a good friend that's asked me to be their trustee
Yeah.
or executor, on your wills and
Sure.
things, but your trustee, a good friend. And people say that to us and like, well, that's quite an honor, right? I mean, seriously, if somebody
Sure.
came to you and said, would you be the steward of my family's health and well-being, basically from a financial standpoint, and maybe even how kids are handled and all these
Yeah.
things, if they're minor children, and it's a huge compliment. But before any of you listeners or viewers say yes to that and commit to that, with all due respect, understand that is a huge undertaking.
Yeah. What are they asking you to do? Because
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
one thing to just finalize an estate, meaning, hey, we're going to just split everything up equally and make sure that happens and make sure the last tax returns are filed. It's still work but there's a finite period to
6
that.
months or so and you're done. So that's one thing.
But if they're asking you to administer this complex and what'd they write in there? Because sometimes people put the craziest stuff in there and it's like, this is not going to work. It can almost be contradictory too. They're like, okay.
Yeah.
You'd hope the attorneys would circumvent that, but sometimes the attorneys are like, hey, if that's what you want, that's what you want. And I'll write it in there.
Yeah.
So you almost want to see what you're getting into before you agree to that. But that's maybe a difficult conversation. But when they're asking you, I think that's worth that.
And even if
insight.
It is. And even if the trust just says exactly what's supposed to happen, if you as that trustee now are in the middle of 3 or 4 or 5 beneficiaries that may or may not have a great relationship, and you're the arbiter, even though you're saying, hey, I'm following the trust, who knows, it's still going to be stressful. It's going to be a second job in those cases
you get
where it's
people
ongoing.
Aren't patient, because things take time. It's not, stuff just doesn't happen instantaneously. And if you've got to deal with that too. And so, it's not always enjoyable.
I want to share a story that I heard from a financial advisor some time ago. And he was sharing that he was having a conversation with one of his clients. And let's say that his client's name is John. And John had just received a sizable inheritance. And John was 50 years old at the time they were having this conversation. And the advisor said, well, with this inheritance, it's large enough that you could retire now if you want. You have a lot of flexibility here. And John shared that he hated his job, did not look forward to going to work, didn't enjoy it at all, but he felt like he had to keep working until age 62 because his dad didn't retire until he was age 62. And then shortly after he retired, he ended up dying. Well, this money that John just now received, apparently it first went to his mom. Now his mom had passed away some years later. Now John has the money, but John felt like this inheritance actually came from all the hard work that his dad had done to support the family until he retired at 62, and then he passes away shortly thereafter. So John was relating to the advisor that I feel like I've got to at least work to 62 because I would feel guilty if I retired before my dad did, because I know how hard he had to work and he wasn't able to enjoy it afterwards. And so they continued the dialogue a little bit longer. And then finally the advisor asked John, he said, John, if your dad was here right now, what do you think he would want you to do? And John thought about it for a moment and he said, I think my dad would tell me to go out and enjoy it because we're not guaranteed tomorrow. And look at me, I died shortly after I retired. So go out and enjoy it. Have fun with the money.
Yeah.
And that was really like this cathartic moment for John and for the advisor. It was, as I talked about earlier, these, stages of adult development, the work that Robert Keegan had done. It seems like they may have had an aha moment where John sort of made a switch from being subject to the guilt that he felt that he couldn't retire before his dad did at age 62 to be able to view the inheritance objectively, to detach himself from some of the emotional guilt feelings that he had. And so again, it just gets back to something I said at the beginning of our conversation here about how money can be so wrapped up with emotion, with all kinds of things that go back to childhood, and it's complicated to say the least. And that's why so many people turn to financial advisors, because they just need a third party that has a lot of experience in dealing with these issues. Not that the advisor has all the answers, not that the advisor is going to tell you do this, do that. It's just someone to go back and forth with to get some different perspectives, to perhaps view things from a different lens, and then it can help the client make a more informed decision. So just like in this case where the advisor was working with John, just that simple question.
Yeah.
If your dad was here, what do you think he would want you to do?
Yeah.
Sometimes that's all it takes to get this aha moment. And that's really, I think, the transformational power of working with the financial advisor right in that example right there.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And, in your example there with John, when, it wasn't that his dad would have wanted him to go, quote, blow all the money recklessly. That wasn't what the conversation was about. It was about just with reasonableness, going out and enjoying the money, maybe having a financial plan, invest some, spend some, treat it, treat the money, own the money. Do not let the money own you. And that's kind of the same thing, your study you mentioned on the outset of the program. And that could be with anything too that we have that's in the material world. We own those things. There's nothing wrong with having nice things, but we own them. They don't own us. And that's a really healthy place to be. I really believe so. And the power of the planning process, again, it will always come back to that, whether you're receiving an inheritance, whether you're receiving you won the lottery, let's say, or let's say you're an athlete and you received a contract, a large contract, or you're just like the rest of us, most of us that have worked and have built up some retirement assets, and now you have to steward those. That falls on your shoulders. Whatever it is, it's having the education, it's having the maturity around it, doing the work up front, especially when you know it's coming. The lottery is weird because you didn't know it was coming, but in all these other cases, you did know it was coming, and doing the work to get yourself out in front of it, to get yourself emotionally healthy, understanding rules and regulations. And I'm going to always default to partnering with a fiduciary financial advisory team that has long, deep experience in understanding rules, regulations, and the emotional side of these things, the familial side of these things. They've seen a lot of different things play out and are able to be a thought partner with you. I think the preparation around that is going to make the odds of success and having you own the money not own you, and you make the right decisions way higher of a probability, and enjoying life, each and every day. When it comes to leaving money, though, when you're talking about heirs, I think outright bequests generally, as we close today, outright bequests can be the structural failure mode where money just gets dropped in people's laps, no matter how mature they are. In some cases, maybe not. But almost everything that protects heirs from blowing money would be a function of keeping assets in a trust, staggering when those assets come out, limiting what they can be spent on, and putting the right person in charge of the trust when that time comes. And if you layered in lifetime gifts along the way, like we've talked about today, while you're living, and had a real conversation about these things, I think you've nailed the bulk of it. I really do.
Excellent. All right. Well, I think that's a great place to wrap up today. So, gentlemen, appreciate it as always. And for each of you listening, if you have any questions or comments, please reach out to us at keenwealthadvisors.com. Please tell all your friends and colleagues about the show. We've got the podcast, of course, the audio version. We also have the Keen Wealth Advisors YouTube channel that you can subscribe to, and you can see our smiling faces each time we put out a new episode. So please subscribe to that. And we appreciate you being a listener, and we will catch you on the next episode of Keen on Retirement.
All right. Thanks, guys. Thanks, everybody.
The Steve Sandusky Advisor Network and Belay Advisor are not affiliated with Keen Wealth Advisors. Opinions expressed by Steve are his own and not necessarily the opinions of Keen Wealth Advisors. Keen Wealth Advisors is an SEC-registered investment advisor. Advisory services are only offered to clients or prospective clients where Keen Wealth Advisors and its representatives are properly licensed or exempt from licensure. The contents of this podcast are intended for the residents of the United States of America. No advice may be rendered by Keen Wealth Advisors unless a client service agreement is in place. This program is intended for informational purposes only and should not be construed as advice on or a recommendation of any particular investment, strategy, or as tax or legal advice for your specific situation. Keen Wealth Advisors is not a tax or legal advisor. To determine which investments may be appropriate for you, consult your licensed professional prior to investing. Information in this program was compiled from sources believed to be reliable. Due to the constant state of data changing, we do not guarantee the timeliness or the accuracy of the information provided. Our views or opinions at the time you are listening to the podcast may be different than they were when the podcast was recorded. Past performance is no guarantee of future results. Any indices referenced for comparison are unmanaged and cannot be invested into directly. Any prices that are referenced or market forecasts are as of the date stated and are not necessarily our opinions moving forward. As always, please remember, investing involves risk and possible loss of principal capital. This podcast is not allowed to be copied, distributed, published, or reproduced without permission from Keen Wealth Advisors.